Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's story. Your likes and subscriptions can give me hope to create better stories. And let me know what changes you'd like me to make to my voice. All right, now let's get to tonight's story. Chapter 1. The Evening Glow. The snow falls softly tonight in the village of Bjornhaven, each flake drifting down like a whispered blessing from the northern sky. It is the deep of winter, when the darkness comes early and stays long, wrapping the small Viking settlement in a blanket of peaceful quiet that seems to slow time itself. From above, if the ravens could see through the gentle snowfall, Bjornhaven would look like a collection of warm amber jewels scattered across the white landscape. Each longhouse glows with the steady light of hearth fires, their peaked roofs heavy with snow that has accumulated over many peaceful days. Thin wisps of smoke rise straight up from the smoke holes, disappearing into the dark sky like prayers made visible. The village sits in a sheltered valley beside a small bay that has frozen solid weeks ago. The ice stretches out smooth and white under the moonlight, broken only by the dark shapes of fishing holes that the villagers keep open with careful tending. Beyond the bay, gentle hills roll away into the darkness, their slopes covered in pine and birch trees that stand silent and still, their branches heavy with snow. But it is not the cold that defines this night, it is the warmth. In the largest longhouse at the centre of the village, Astrid Ironweaver tends to her evening tasks with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who has learned that the best moments in life are found not in hurrying, but in savouring. She is a woman of perhaps 40 winters, with greying blonde hair that she keeps braided back in the traditional way, woven with small silver rings that catch the firelight when she moves. Astrid has lived in Bjornhaven all her life, as did her mother before her, and her grandmother before that. She knows the rhythm of this place as deeply as she knows her own breathing. She knows that in winter the village turns inward, becomes a place of stories and quiet crafts, of long conversations by the fire and the simple pleasure of being warm and safe while the world outside sleeps under snow. The longhouse is built in the old way, with thick wooden walls made from pine logs that fit together so perfectly that no winter wind can find its way inside. The roof is steep and strong, designed to shed snow and last through many seasons. Inside, the central hearth burns with a fire that has not been allowed to die for 3 months now, tended carefully through each day and banked with ash each night to keep the coals alive until morning. The fire burns with the deep, steady warmth that comes only from well-seasoned oak and birch. Astrid selected these logs herself last summer, splitting them and stacking them in the woodshed to dry through the warm months. Now they give their warmth generously, filling the house with the rich, sweet smell of burning hardwood that mingles with the other scents of home. There is the smell of bread, for Astrid has spent part of this afternoon baking. The loaves sit cooling on wooden shelves near the fire, their crusts golden brown and marked with the traditional patterns that her grandmother taught her to score into the dough. The bread was made from barley and rye, grains that grow well in the short northern summers and keep through the long winters when they are properly stored. The scent of the bread mingles with other comfortable smells. There is the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging in bundles from the rafters, chamomile and meadowsweet, yarrow and wild thyme that Astrid gathered last summer when the meadows were full of flowers and buzzing with bees. There is the clean smell of wool, for several fleeces hang drying near the fire, waiting to be combed and spun into yarn during the long winter evenings. And underneath it all is the smell of the house itself, the scent of seasoned wood and stone, of fires that have burned here for generations, of a place where people have lived and loved and raised their children in safety and peace. Astrid moves quietly around the main room of the longhouse, checking on her various tasks with the unhurried attention of someone who has learnt to find satisfaction in simple, necessary work. She adjusts the position of the bread, turning the loaves so they will cool evenly. She adds another log to the fire, not because it needs it yet, but because she enjoys the way the flames leap up to embrace the new wood, sending up a shower of tiny sparks that disappear into the darkness above. The main room of the longhouse is large and comfortable, designed for the communal life that sustains Viking families through the dark months. The ceiling is high, supported by carved wooden posts that Astrid's grandfather made when he first built this house. The posts are decorated with intricate patterns that tell stories, images of trees and birds, of ships sailing under starry skies, of the changing seasons that mark the passage of time in this northern land. Along the walls are wooden benches covered with thick furs and woolen blankets. These benches serve as seats during the day and beds at night, for in winter the family sleeps together in the main room where the fire keeps the cold at bay. The floor is made of smooth wooden planks, worn soft by generations of footsteps, and covered with thick rugs woven from wool dyed with colours drawn from the forest and fields. At one end of the room stands Astrid's loom, where she weaves the cloth that will become clothes and blankets and household linens. The loom is tall and impressive, made from oak by the village's finest craftsmen. Tonight it holds the beginnings of a new piece, a blanket woven in shades of blue and grey and cream, colours that remind Astrid of winter mornings when the sky is pale and the snow reflects all the subtle shades of light. Near the loom sits a spinning wheel, and beside it a basket full of wool waiting to be spun. The wool is soft and clean, carded into fluffy clouds that seem to glow in the firelight. Astrid raised the sheep that gave this wool herself, tending them through the green summers and keeping them safe in the barn through the winters. She knows each animal by name and temperament, knows which ewes give the softest wool and which rams father the strongest lambs. But tonight, Astrid is not spinning or weaving. Tonight, she is preparing for something even more important than cloth making. Tonight is a story night. Story nights happen when the conditions are just right. When the snow falls gently enough to muffle all outside sounds. When the fire burns bright and warm. When the bread has just come from the oven and fills the house with its welcoming scent. Story nights are gifts that cannot be planned or forced. They simply arrive, like the snow itself, and wise people recognize them and give themselves over to their magic. Astrid can feel it in the air tonight. That special quality that transforms an ordinary winter evening into something memorable. Perhaps it is the way the snow falls so steadily and peacefully outside. Perhaps it is the particular warmth of the fire, or the way the bread turned out so perfectly golden, or the way the house seems to embrace its occupants with extra coziness. Whatever it is, Astrid knows that tonight will be a night for stories. She moves to a large wooden chest that sits along one wall of the main room. This chest was her grandmother's and her great-grandmother's before that. It is made from oak that has darkened with age, and its surface is carved with protective symbols: ravens and wolves, Thor's hammer, and the intertwined branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree that connects all the realms of existence. Inside the chest, wrapped carefully in soft woolen cloth, are the treasures of Astrid's family. There are pieces of silver jewellery passed down through generations, each piece telling its own story of love and celebration. There are tools made by long-dead craftsmen, their handles smooth with use, their metal still bright despite their age. There are small carved figures representing the gods and spirits that watch over the family. And there are bundles of dried flowers from summers long past that still carry the faint memory of their fragrance. But what Astrid reaches for tonight is a smaller chest nested within the larger one. This smaller chest holds the most precious treasure of all, the story tokens. Each token is a small object that serves as a key to unlock one of the old tales. There is a piece of amber with an insect trapped inside, which opens the story of how the world was formed from ice and fire. There is a small silver wolf, which tells the tale of Fenrir and the binding of the gods. There is a tiny wooden ship, perfectly carved, which holds the story of the first voyage to the western lands across the sea. Astrid runs her fingers over the tokens, feeling the familiar shapes, considering which story wants to be told tonight. Each token seems to pulse with its own quiet energy, as if the stories themselves are alive and waiting. Some nights, one token will seem to call out more strongly than the others, as if that particular tale needs to be remembered on that particular evening. Tonight, her fingers stop on a token she has not touched for many months, a small piece of carved whalebone, smooth and white as fresh snow. This token holds one of the gentlest stories in the collection, a tale of winter and rest, of the deep peace that comes when the world sleeps under snow and dreams of spring to come. As Astrid lifts the whalebone token, she hears the sound she has been listening for. Footsteps on the wooden walkway that leads to her door, and the soft voices of her neighbours approaching through the snow. For on story nights, the invitation goes out without words. People sense the magic in the air, and they come as if drawn by invisible threads, bringing their own warmth and attention to add to the evening's spell. The first to arrive is old Magnus, who lives 3 houses down the village path. Magnus is perhaps 70 winters old, his white beard long and carefully braided, his eyes still bright and curious despite his age. He has been the village's lead storyteller for more years than most people can remember, and he knows more tales than anyone alive. But Magnus also knows when it is time to listen rather than speak. And tonight, he senses that Astrid will be the one to guide them all into story. "Good evening, Astrid Ironweaver," Magnus says as she opens the door to welcome him. His voice is warm and deep, seasoned by years of storytelling. "I smelled your bread from my own hearth, and something told me this might be a night for gathering." "You are always welcome, Magnus Storykeeper," Astrid replies, using the title of honor that the village has given him. Come in. The fire is bright and the bread is still warm from baking." Magnus sheds his heavy winter cloak and hangs it on one of the wooden pegs by the door. Underneath, he wears the traditional winter garb of the village. Thick woolen trousers dyed deep blue, a linen shirt embroidered with protective symbols by his late wife, and over it a woolen vest that his daughter wove for him last year. His boots are made from sealskin, waterproof and warm, designed to keep feet comfortable even on the coldest days. As Magnus settles onto one of the benches near the fire, stretching his hands toward the warmth, more neighbors arrive. There is Sigrid Brewmaster and her husband Olaf, who live in the house with the red-painted door. Sigrid is known throughout the village for the mead she brews from honey and herbs. Mead that can warm a person from the inside out and inspire the most wonderful dreams. She carries with her tonight a small wooden pitcher wrapped in cloth to keep its contents warm. Behind Sigrid and Olaf come their children, twin daughters named Raven and Wren, both about 12 winters old, and their son Eric, who has just seen his 10th winter. The children move with barely contained excitement, for they love story nights above all other entertainments. They know that on such evenings, they will hear tales that connect them to their ancestors, stories that teach them who they are and where they come from. Next to arrive are Bjorn Woodcarver and his wife Ingrid, along with their teenage son Leif. Bjorn's hands are permanently stained with the oils and dyes he uses in his craft, and everything he touches seems to take on a subtle beauty. Tonight, he carries a small bundle wrapped in sealskin, and when he unwraps it by the fire, it reveals a set of wooden cups he has just finished carving. Each cup is unique, decorated with different patterns that seem to dance in the firelight. "I thought we might have need of these tonight," Bjorn says with a quiet smile, arranging the cups near the hearth, where they catch and reflect the warm glow of the flames. Last to arrive, shaking the snow from her thick woolen cloak, is Freydis the Wise Woman. Freydis is the village's healer and herb keeper, a woman of middle years, whose knowledge of plants and remedies is matched only by her understanding of the old ways and the old stories. She carries with her always a small leather pouch filled with dried herbs, and tonight she adds a pinch of something sweet-smelling to the fire, causing the flames to flare briefly with colours that seem almost magical. "Chamomile and lavender," she explains, as the aromatic smoke curls up toward the ceiling, to ease the mind and prepare the spirit for rest. As the small group settles around Astrid's hearth, each person finding their preferred spot on the benches or on thick rugs on the floor, a comfortable quiet falls over the room. This is the quiet that comes before stories, the settling in time when people let go of the day's concerns and open themselves to older truths. Outside, the snow continues to fall, each flake adding to the soft blanket that covers the village and the surrounding countryside. The wind has died down to barely a whisper, and the only sounds from beyond the walls are the occasional crack of ice adjusting to the cold and the distant call of an owl hunting in the forest. But inside Astrid's longhouse, the sounds are all of comfort and home. The fire crackles and pops as pockets of sap in the burning wood expand and burst. Someone's stomach rumbles quietly, reminding everyone that they have not yet eaten the evening meal. A log settles deeper into the fire with a soft thud, sending up a brief shower of sparks. Astrid moves among her guests with quiet grace, offering warm bread spread with butter churned from the milk of her own cows, and honey collected from the beehives she tends in a sheltered spot behind the house. The honey is dark and rich, with the complex flavour that comes from flowers that bloom throughout the northern summer. Clover and wildflowers, the blossoms of fruit trees, and the tiny flowers of herbs. Sigrid pours her warm mead into Bjorn's beautifully carved cups, and the golden liquid seems to glow with its own inner light. The mead is sweet and smooth, flavoured with herbs that promote peaceful sleep and pleasant dreams. As each person takes their first sip, a visible relaxation passes through the group, as if the mead is not just warming their bodies, but soothing their souls. When everyone has been served and has had time to take the edge off their hunger and thirst, Astrid takes her place on a low stool near the fire, where the light will play across her face as she speaks. In her hand, she holds the whalebone token, its surface smooth and warm from her touch. Friends and neighbours, she begins, her voice pitched perfectly for the intimate gathering, neither too loud nor too soft, but just right for carrying to every corner of the room, without disturbing the peaceful atmosphere. Tonight, the snow falls gently, and our homes are warm, and we are together in safety and comfort. It seems to me that this is a night for remembering. A murmur of agreement passes through the group. Young Raven and Wren lean forward eagerly, their eyes bright in the firelight. Eric settles more deeply into his position on a thick bearskin rug, his cup of mead held carefully in both hands. The adults nod knowingly, recognizing the signs that indicate a particularly special story evening. The token that chose to speak tonight, Astrid continues, holding up the carved whalebone so that everyone can see it, carries within it the memory of a winter long ago, when our great-grandparents' great-grandparents learned an important lesson about patience and trust, about the deep rest that comes to those who know how to wait for spring. She places the token on a small wooden shelf that extends from the side of the hearth, positioning it where the firelight will illuminate its carved surface. The bone seems to glow in the dancing light, and for a moment, everyone in the room can almost feel the presence of the ancient whale from which it came, swimming in dark northern seas under skies thick with stars. This is the story of the winter of deep snow, Astrid says, settling back on her stool and letting her gaze move slowly around the circle of faces, making eye contact with each person in turn. It is a story our people have told for more generations than we can count, and each time it is told, it reminds us of something important about who we are and how we fit into the great pattern of the world. Outside, a soft thud signals that snow has slid from the roof as Astrid begins to speak the opening words of the tale. Her voice takes on the special cadence that storytellers have used since the beginning of time, a rhythm that seems to match the beating of the human heart and the flow of breath in and out of the lungs. It is a rhythm that bypasses the busy mind and speaks directly to the deeper parts of the soul, the parts that remember what it was like to gather around fires and share the wisdom of the ancestors. Long ago, in a winter that seemed to have no ending, she begins, and immediately the room seems to settle even more deeply into itself, as if the walls are leaning in to listen, as if the very air is preparing to carry the words not just to the ears of those present, but to their hearts and memories, where the story will take root and grow and become part of who they are. And so begins the first of the evening's tales, told in a voice as warm and comforting as the bread, as golden and soothing as the mead, as steady and reliable as the fire that will burn through the night, keeping them safe and warm while the snow continues to fall on the peaceful village of Bjornhaven. The story unfolds slowly, like a flower opening petal by petal in the warmth of spring sunlight. There is no hurry here, no rush to reach the end. Each word is chosen carefully, each pause timed perfectly to let the listener's imaginations fill in the details, to let them see in their mind's eyes the events of long ago. As Astrid speaks, the room seems to grow even more comfortable, if such a thing is possible. Bodies relax more deeply into furs and blankets. Breathing becomes slower and more regular. The harsh edges of daily concerns seem to soften and fade away, replaced by the timeless peace that comes from being part of a tradition that stretches back through countless generations. The children's eyes grow heavy, but they fight sleep because they don't want to miss a single word. The adults let themselves sink into the rhythm of the story, feeling their own childhood memories stirring as they remember other nights like this, other stories told beside other fires, other moments when the simple act of listening connected them to something larger than themselves. And Astrid continues to speak, her voice carrying them all deeper into the tale, deeper into the warmth and safety of the moment, deeper into the ancient understanding that some things, stories, community, the simple act of sharing warmth on a cold night, are more valuable than all the silver and gold in the world. Chapter 2. The Hearth's Embrace. The story that Astrid tells is one that has been shaped by countless tellings. Polished smooth like a river stone by the countless voices that have carried it down through the generations. It is the story of the winter of deep snow, and as she speaks, the listeners can almost see the events unfolding before them, can almost feel themselves present in that long ago time when their ancestors learned a lesson that still echoes today. In the days when my grandmother's grandmother was young, Astrid continues, her voice finding the perfect rhythm for the tale. There lived in this very valley a village much like our own Bjornhaven. The houses were built in the same style, with thick log walls and steep roofs designed to shed the heavy snows. The people lived much as we do, tending their animals in summer, harvesting their crops, preparing for the long winter months with the same careful attention to detail that keeps us safe and comfortable today. As she speaks, Astrid's hands move gently in her lap, occasionally lifting to illustrate a point or to touch the whalebone token that rests on its shelf beside the fire. Her movements are economical and graceful, never distracting from her words, but adding a subtle visual element that helps draw the listeners deeper into the story. But this particular winter was different from any that had come before, she continues. It began early in what should have been the middle of autumn, and the snow that fell was unlike any snow the villagers had ever seen. It was not the light, dry snow of ordinary winters, but heavy and wet, the kind that clings to everything it touches and builds up quickly into drifts that can bury a house. Young Eric shifts on his bearskin rug, pulling his woolen blanket more tightly around his shoulders. The description of the heavy snow makes it day after day. The snow fell. Astrid's voice continues, painting the picture with words that seem to make the air in the room grow thicker and more hushed. Week after week, it accumulated. The villagers who had thought themselves well prepared for winter began to realize that this was no ordinary season. The snow grew so deep that it covered the lower branches of the pine trees. It filled the spaces between houses until the village looked like a collection of small islands in a white sea. Sigrid Brewmaster takes a slow sip of her mead, savouring the honey sweetness on her tongue as she listens. She thinks of her own winter preparations, the barrels of grain stored in her cellar, the preserved meat hanging in her smokehouse, the bundles of dried herbs that will provide vitamins and flavouring through the dark months. She knows how much planning and work goes into surviving a northern winter. And she can imagine the growing concern that the villagers in the story must have felt as their ordinary winter stretched on and on. The strangest thing about this endless winter, Astrid continues, was not just the amount of snow that fell, but the way it affected the people. At first, as the snow grew deeper, the villagers began to worry. They counted their stores of food and fuel, calculating how long their supplies would last if the winter continued much longer than usual. They checked and double-checked their animals, making sure the sheep and cattle were warm and fed in their shelters. Bjorn Woodcarver nods knowingly as he listens. He understands the anxiety that comes with depending on limited supplies, the careful calculations that must be made to ensure that everything lasts until spring returns. His own workshop is stocked with enough wood to keep him busy through the winter, but he knows that if the cold season stretched too long, even his carefully gathered materials might run short. But as the weeks turned into months, and the snow continued to fall with no sign of stopping, something unexpected happened. Astrid's voice takes on a note of gentle wonder, hinting at the transformation that is to come. Instead of growing more anxious, the villagers began to discover something remarkable. They found that the deeper the snow grew around their houses, the more peaceful and secure they felt inside. She pauses here, letting the paradox settle in the minds of her listeners. Outside, they can hear the soft whisper of snow against the windows, and the sound seems to underscore the point of the story. The snow that might seem threatening from one perspective becomes, from another perspective, a source of comfort and protection. The snow, you see, acted like a great blanket wrapped around each house, Astrid explains. It blocked the winter winds that usually howled through the village, making the houses shake and rattle. It muffled all the harsh sounds of winter, the crack of ice, the groan of tree branches bending under the weight of snow, the sharp calls of ravens in the grey sky. Inside their snow-wrapped homes, the villagers found a quiet deeper than any they had ever experienced. Freydis, the wise woman, closes her eyes as she listens, remembering times in her own life when she has experienced such deep quiet. As someone who spends much of her time listening to the concerns of those who come to her for healing, to the subtle signals that plants and herbs send about their properties, to the small changes in weather and season that affect the gathering and preparation of medicines, she knows how precious true silence can be. And in this deep quiet, Astrid continues, the villagers made another discovery. They found that time seemed to slow down, to become less urgent. Without the usual winter tasks that keep people busy chopping wood, clearing paths, tending to animals that need frequent attention, they had time to really see each other, to have the kind of long, meandering conversations that revealed the depths of friendship and family love. The fire pops and crackles, sending up a shower of tiny sparks that disappear into the darkness above. The sound punctuates Astrid's words perfectly, reminding everyone present of the simple pleasure of sitting around a warm fire with people they care about, engaged in the timeless activity of sharing stories. The children in that long-ago village, Astrid says, glancing at the young ones in her current audience, discovered that when there was no hurry, no pressure to finish tasks quickly and move on to the next thing, they could play games that lasted for hours. They could build elaborate cities from carved wooden blocks, or create entire worlds in their imaginations, or listen to their grandparents tell stories that seemed to go on forever, without ever becoming boring. Eric smiles at this, thinking of the wooden toys that his father Bjorn has carved for him over the years. Ships and horses, warriors and dragons, entire sets of miniature tools and household items. On nights like this, when the outside world seems far away, those toys become gateways to adventure and imagination. The adults in the village found their own gifts in the enforced slowness of that endless winter, Astrid continues. The weavers discovered that when they were not rushing to finish a piece of cloth, they could put incredible detail into their patterns, could experiment with new combinations of colours and textures. The woodcarvers found that their hands, freed from the pressure of deadlines, could create objects of such beauty that they seemed almost magical. Jorn nods deeply at this, understanding exactly what the story describes. He has experienced those moments when time seems to stretch out, when his hands move almost without conscious direction, when the wood seems to tell him what it wants to become. Those moments are rare and precious, and they usually come only when he is not worried about finishing quickly or meeting someone else's expectations. The brewers and bakers, Astrid says, with a meaningful look at Sigrid, found that they could experiment with new recipes, could allow their bread to rise for days instead of hours, could let their mead ferment slowly and develop flavors more complex than anything they had created before. The cooks discovered spice combinations that had never been tried, learned to prepare foods so slowly and carefully that every bite was a revelation. Sigrid raises her cup in a small salute to this part of the story. She knows the truth of what Astrid describes, the way that hurrying can ruin a batch of mead, the way that patience and attention can transform simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Some of her finest batches have been created during the quietest times of winter, when she could tend to the brewing process with the kind of meditative attention that produces real artistry. But perhaps the most important discovery that the villagers made during that winter of deep snow, Astrid continues, her voice taking on an even more thoughtful tone, was about the nature of contentment itself. They learned that happiness does not come from having perfect conditions or from never facing challenges. Instead, they discovered that contentment comes from finding peace within whatever circumstances life presents. This is the heart of the story, the lesson that has kept it alive through so many generations of telling. Old Magnus, who has heard this tale many times and told it himself on numerous occasions, nods slowly as he recognizes the approach to the story's central wisdom. He knows that Astrid is preparing to guide her listeners to the deepest truth that the tale has to offer. As the months passed and the snow continued to fall, Astrid says, the villagers stopped counting the days until spring would come. They stopped calculating how long their food would last, or worrying about whether the winter would ever end. Instead, they learned to inhabit each day fully, to find richness and meaning in the simple activities that filled their hours. The room seems to settle even more deeply into itself as Astrid speaks these words. The listeners can feel the truth of what she describes, can sense it in their own bodies as they relax more completely into the warmth and comfort of the moment. The anxiety and hurry that so often characterize daily life seem to dissolve in the face of the story's gentle wisdom. They learned to savor their meals instead of eating quickly and moving on to the next task. Astrid continues. Ingrid, Bjorn's wife, pulls her own sleeping daughter closer as she listens. Little Astrid, named for the storyteller, has fallen asleep during the tale. her head resting against her mother's shoulder, her breathing slow and regular. Ingrid can feel the truth of the story in this moment, can recognize the deep peace that comes from being fully present with the people she loves. And something even more wonderful began to happen in that village, Astrid's voice continues, drawing the story toward its climax. The villagers began to notice that their health improved during that long winter. Despite the unusual conditions, despite the fact that they were spending more time indoors than ever before, they felt stronger and more energetic. Their sleep was deeper and more restful. Their minds were clearer and calmer. Freydis the wise woman understands this phenomenon from her years of studying the connections between mind and body, between emotional state and physical health. She has seen how stress and anxiety can make people sick, and how peace and contentment can promote healing and vitality. The story describes something that she has observed many times in her practice: the way that true rest and genuine peace can be more healing than any medicine. The healers in that village, Astrid says, as if reading Freydis's thoughts, realized that they had discovered something more powerful than any herb or potion. They had learned the healing power of deep rest, of genuine contentment, of being completely present in the moment, instead of always worrying about the future or regretting the past. The fire burns lower now, settling into the deep bed of coals that will keep the room warm through the night. Astrid adds another log, not because the fire needs it immediately, but because she knows that the story still has more to give, and she wants to ensure that the warmth and light continue to embrace the listeners as they absorb the tale's wisdom. When spring finally came to that village, she continues, it arrived not with the dramatic melting and flooding that everyone expected, but gently, gradually, like a friend returning from a long journey. The snow melted slowly, revealing a world that seemed somehow more beautiful than anyone remembered. The grass was greener, the flowers more vibrant, the sky more blue. Young Raven opens her eyes wider at this description, imagining the beauty of that long-awaited spring. She thinks of the springs she has experienced in her own short life, remembers the joy of seeing the first flowers push up through the melting snow, the excitement of hearing the first birds return from their winter travels. But the most remarkable thing, Astrid says, preparing to deliver the story's final wisdom, was that the villagers realized they did not want to return to their old way of living. They had learnt something during that winter of deep snow that was too valuable to abandon. They had discovered the secret of true contentment, and they were determined to carry that knowledge with them into the warmer seasons. The room is very quiet now, with only the soft sounds of the fire and the gentle breathing of the listeners. Everyone present can feel the weight of the story's message, can sense its relevance to their own lives. In a world that often seems to demand constant activity and endless striving, the tale offers a different possibility: the chance to find peace and satisfaction in simplicity and presence. So when the snow was gone and the work of spring began, Astrid continues, the villagers approached their tasks differently than they had in previous years. They worked steadily, but without panic, taking time to appreciate the beauty of their surroundings and the pleasure of working alongside friends and family. They celebrated each small accomplishment instead of constantly focusing on how much more needed to be done. This resonates deeply with everyone in the room, each person recognizing the tendency to always be rushing toward the next goal, the next achievement, the next season. The story offers a gentle reminder that happiness is not something that exists only in the future, but something that can be found in the present moment if one knows how to look for it. And they never forgot the lessons of that remarkable winter, Astrid says, bringing the tale toward its close. In years to come, whenever life became too hurried or too stressful, they would remember the deep peace they had found during the winter of deep snow. They would slow down, breathe deeply, and look for the contentment that was always available to them if they knew how to receive it. She pauses here, letting the story settle in the minds and hearts of her listeners. The tale is essentially complete, but like all good stories, it needs time to take root, time for its wisdom to be absorbed and integrated. And so, she concludes softly, the winter of deep snow became not a hardship to be endured, but a gift to be remembered. A time when an entire village learned the secret that mystics and wise women have always known. That peace is not something we must search for in distant places or future times, but something that dwells always in the present moment, waiting patiently for us to slow down enough to notice it. Astrid places her hand gently on the whalebone token, completing the ritual that binds the story to the object that holds its memory. The token will carry this telling forward into future nights, future gatherings, future moments when people need to be reminded of the deep contentment that is always available to those who know how to receive it. The room remains quiet for several long moments after the story ends. This is the sacred pause that follows all truly meaningful tales. The time when listeners integrate what they have heard, when the story's wisdom settles into their bones and becomes part of who they are. Outside, the snow continues its gentle fall, each flake adding to the blanket that wraps the village in peace and silence. Old Magnus is the first to break the contemplative silence, but he does so in the traditional way, with the ritual words that acknowledge a story well told. The tale has been given voice, he says solemnly, and we have received it. May it live in us as it lived in those who came before us, and may we pass it on to those who come after. May it live in us. The others repeat in unison, their voices creating a harmony that seems to resonate with the very walls of the longhouse. This is an ancient response, as old as storytelling itself, a way of formally accepting the responsibility of carrying the tale forward into the future. But the evening is not over. The fire still burns bright. The mead cups are not yet empty, and the snow outside continues to create the perfect conditions for more sharing, more connection, more of the deep communion that happens when people gather together in warmth and safety to remember who they are and where they come from. Sigrid Brewmaster rises from her place and moves to refill everyone's cups with her golden mead. The honey wine catches the firelight as it pours, seeming to carry its own warm glow. As she serves, she speaks quietly to each person, asking how they are feeling, whether they are warm enough, whether they need more bread or another blanket. This attention to the comfort of others is part of what makes story nights so special. The way that everyone present takes responsibility for creating and maintaining the atmosphere of safety and care. Young Eric, who has been fighting sleep for the past hour, finally surrenders to the drowsiness that the warm mead and gentle story have induced. He curls up more deeply in his bearskin rug, using a small pillow that his mother embroidered with protective runes. His breathing becomes slow and regular, and a peaceful expression settles over his features. His parents smile as they watch him, recognizing the deep rest that comes to children who fall asleep surrounded by love and safety. The twins Raven and Wren are also struggling to stay awake, but they are determined not to miss any part of this special evening. They lean against each other for support, sharing warmth and companionship as they listen to the quiet conversations that spring up now that the formal storytelling has ended. These conversations are as much a part of Story Night as the tales themselves, the gentle sharing of thoughts and memories that the stories inspire. Freydis, the wise woman, speaks quietly with Astrid about the healing properties of different herbs, comparing notes about which plants are most effective for promoting peaceful sleep. They discuss the chamomile and lavender that Freydis added to the fire earlier, and other herbs that can help calm the mind and prepare the body for rest. Their conversation is soft and meandering, the kind of unhurried dialogue that can only happen when people have time to really listen to each other. Bjorn Woodcarver examines one of his newly carved cups by firelight, running his thumb over the smooth wood and the intricate patterns he has carved around its rim. The cup represents hours of patient work, but work that he did for the pure pleasure of creation rather than because anyone demanded it of him. The story Astrid told has reminded him of the joy that comes from doing something slowly and well, without worrying about deadlines or external pressures. The old ways knew something we sometimes forget, Magnus says thoughtfully, his voice carrying easily through the room despite its gentle volume. They knew that the dark season is not an enemy to be fought, but a teacher to be welcomed. Winter offers us gifts that no other season can provide. The gift of rest, the gift of turning inward, the gift of discovering what really matters when all the distractions are stripped away. His words resonate with everyone present. In their modern world, there is often pressure to maintain the same pace year-round, to treat winter as simply an inconvenience to be endured, rather than a natural pause that serves an important purpose. The story they have just heard reminds them of a different way of relating to the dark season, a way that honors the rhythm of rest and renewal that governs all life. "I have been thinking," says Ingrid quietly, "about how the villagers in the story learned to savor their meals. How often do we eat our food without really tasting it, because we are thinking about other things, or hurrying to finish so we can move on to the next task?" She takes a small bite of Astrid's bread, closing her eyes to fully appreciate its texture and flavor. This bread, for instance, it deserves our full attention. Astrid has put her skill and care into making it, and we honor that gift when we truly taste what she has created. This observation sparks a gentle discussion about mindfulness, about the art of being fully present with whatever activity occupies the moment. The villagers in the story learned this art out of necessity, when the deep snow forced them to slow down and pay attention. But the people gathered around Astrid's fire tonight can choose to cultivate that same "I have been thinking," says Ingrid quietly, about how the villagers in the story learned to savor their meals. How often do we eat our food without really tasting it, because we are thinking about other things, or hurrying to finish so we can move on to the next task? She takes a small bite of Astrid's bread, closing her eyes to fully appreciate its texture and flavor. This bread, for instance, it deserves our full attention. Astrid has put her skill and care into making it, and we honor that gift when we truly taste what she has created. This observation sparks a gentle discussion about mindfulness, about the art of being fully present with whatever activity occupies the moment. The villagers in the story learned this art out of necessity, when the deep snow forced them to slow down and pay attention. But the people gathered around Astrid's fire tonight can choose to cultivate that same quality of attention, that same appreciation for the simple gifts that serve. As the evening progresses, the conversations become even more relaxed and intimate. People share memories from their own childhoods, stories about their grandparents, reflections on the changes they have witnessed in their own lives. The fire provides not just warmth and light, but a kind of sacred space where deeper truths can be spoken and heard. Olaf tells a brief story about his own grandfather, who lived to be nearly 90 years old and who always claimed that his longevity came from knowing how to rest properly. He would say that most people think rest is just the absence of work, Olaf recalls. But real rest is an active practice, a way of opening yourself to receive the gifts that life wants to give you. The twins, despite their best efforts, finally succumb to sleep, curled together like puppies under a thick woolen blanket. Their parents cover them more carefully, tucking the blanket around their shoulders and smoothing their hair with gentle hands. Even in sleep, the children seem to be smiling, as if the story they heard is giving them pleasant dreams. Leif, Bjorn and Ingrid's teenage son, speaks up for the first time this evening. This insight from one so young impresses everyone present. Magnus nods approvingly, recognizing in Leaf the kind of wisdom that often comes to young people who have been raised with stories and traditions that connect them to deeper truths about life. "That is exactly right," Magnus says. "The body needs fuel and warmth to survive winter, but the soul needs something different. It needs beauty and connection and meaning. Story nights like this one are part of how we feed the soul during the dark season." As if to emphasize his point, the fire chooses that moment to settle with a soft whisper, sending up a column of sparks that dance briefly in the air before disappearing into the darkness above. The sparks seem to carry with them all the warmth and beauty and meaning that the evening has generated, spreading it throughout the house and beyond, touching everyone present with a sense of connection to something larger than themselves. Astrid rises from her storytelling stool and moves to tend the fire, adding another log and adjusting the burning wood so that it will continue to provide warmth through the night. As she works, she reflects on the evening that is drawing toward its close, thinking about how the simple act of gathering together to share food and stories can create such a profound sense of peace and connection. "Friends," she says, when she has finished with the fire and returned to her place, "I want to thank you all for bringing your presence and attention to this evening. Stories are like seeds. They need the warmth of caring listeners to grow and flourish. Tonight, you have helped the old tale take root once again, ensuring that it will continue to live and teach for generations to come." There is a murmur of appreciation for these words, and for the evening that Astrid has created and guided. Everyone present feels the truth of what she has said. They have participated in something ancient and important, something that connects them not just to each other, but to the long line of their ancestors who have gathered around fires and shared wisdom through stories. "Before we part for the night," Magnus says, "perhaps we should take a moment to listen to the silence outside, to appreciate the peace that surrounds us." He moves to one of the windows and opens the wooden shutter slightly, allowing a small draft of cold air to enter the room. With it comes the profound quiet of deep winter night, the kind of silence that can only exist when snow has muffled all the usual sounds of the world. Everyone listens for a long moment to this silence, feeling it settle into their bones like a blessing. It is the same silence that the villagers in the story discovered during their winter of deep snow. The deep peace that comes when the world pauses and turns inward, creating space for rest and reflection and renewal. When Magnus closes the shutter again, the warmth of the fire seems even more precious, the light even more golden, the sense of safety and community even more profound. The contrast between the cold silence outside and the warm fellowship inside creates a perfect encapsulation of what makes winter gatherings so special. The way they create islands of human warmth and connection in the midst of the season's natural pause. Sleep well, all of you, Astrid says as people begin to gather their cloaks and prepare for the short walk home through the snow. May your dreams be peaceful, and may you wake tomorrow with hearts as quiet and content as the village sleeping under snow. One by one, her neighbours bid her good night, thanking her for the story and for the evening of friendship and reflection. Each person bundles up carefully in their winter garments, wrapping themselves in the thick cloaks and warm mittens that will protect them during the brief journey home. The children who have fallen asleep are gathered up by their parents and wrapped in additional blankets for the trip. As the last guest departs, Astrid stands in her doorway for a moment, watching the small procession of lantern lights moving through the snow-covered village. Each light bobs gently as its carrier walks carefully along the paths, and gradually they disappear into the various houses, leaving the village once again wrapped in peaceful darkness. Astrid closes her door and begins the quiet ritual of banking the fire for the night, covering the coals with ash so that they will survive until morning while still providing gentle warmth through the dark hours. She tidies the room, washing the wooden cups and putting away the remains of the bread and mead. But she leaves the whalebone token where it is, on its shelf beside the hearth, where it can continue to hold the memory of this evening's telling. As she prepares for sleep, Astrid reflects on the gift that story nights represent, the way they create connection and meaning, the way they pass wisdom from one generation to the next, the way they remind people of what really matters in life. She thinks about the children who were present tonight, absorbing not just the words of the story, but the entire experience of gathering together in warmth and safety to share something beautiful and meaningful. The story they heard tonight will become part of those children's memories, will shape their understanding of what it means to find contentment and peace. Years from now, when they face their own challenges and difficulties, they will remember the tale of the winter of deep snow, and it will remind them that peace is always available to those who know how to receive it. Outside, the snow continues to fall, adding its quiet blessing to the sleeping village. Inside her warm house, Astrid settles into her bed, pulling thick furs and woolen blankets around herself. The fire glows softly in the darkness, and the house holds the lingering warmth of the evening's fellowship, like a gentle embrace. As she drifts towards sleep, Astrid can feel the story continuing to work its magic, not just in her own mind, but in the minds and hearts of all who heard it tonight. The tale has done what all good stories do. It has planted seeds of wisdom that will continue to grow and flourish, providing guidance and comfort whenever they are needed. The wind outside has died to barely a whisper, and the only sound is the soft settling of snow on the roof and the gentle breathing of the house itself as it rests in the embrace of winter's peace. It is a night for deep dreams and peaceful rest, a night that will be remembered long after the snow has melted and spring has returned to the valley. And in the morning, When the villagers wake to find their world transformed once again by the night's gentle snowfall, they will carry with them the gifts that the evening has provided. The memory of connection and warmth, the wisdom of an ancient story, and the deep knowing that peace and contentment are always available to those who have learned how to receive them. Chapter 3. The Stories Within Stories. When Astrid wakes the next morning, the quality of light filtering through her shutters tells her immediately that the snow has continued through the night. There is a particular brightness that comes only when fresh snow covers the world, the clean white radiance that transforms even the dimmest winter day into something luminous and peaceful. She lies still for a moment, wrapped in her warm furs, listening to the profound quiet that surrounds the village. The fire has burned down to glowing coals during the night, but the house still holds its warmth. This is the gift of solid construction and good planning. Walls thick enough to hold the heat, a foundation deep enough to stay stable, a roof designed to shed snow while keeping the interior dry and comfortable. Astrid's grandfather knew his craft well when he built this house, and his knowledge continues to provide comfort and security decades after his death. Rising slowly, Astrid tends to the morning fire, adding kindling and small split logs until bright flames dance once again in the hearth. The familiar ritual of fire tending centers her thoughts and prepares her for the day ahead. As she works, she thinks about the previous evening's gathering, remembering the faces of her neighbors as they listened to the story, the way the children's eyes grew heavy with sleep, the gentle conversations that followed the formal telling. Outside, she can hear the soft sounds of the village waking up. Doors opening and closing, the crunch of footsteps on snow. Quiet voices calling greetings across the white expanses between houses. These are the sounds of a community that knows how to live peacefully with winter, that has learned to find rhythm and purpose even in the depths of the cold season. As Astrid prepares her morning meal of porridge made from oats and barley, sweetened with honey and enriched with cream from her own cows, she finds herself thinking about stories. Not just the tale she told last night, but the larger story of which it is a part. Every family, every village, every culture is built on stories, on the accumulated wisdom of generations who have faced similar challenges and learned how to thrive despite difficulties. The story of the winter of deep snow is just one thread in a vast tapestry of tales that have been woven together over countless generations. Each story carries within it the seeds of other stories, creates connections to other truths, opens doorways to deeper understanding. Last night's telling was like dropping a pebble into still water. The ripples are still spreading, still creating new patterns of meaning and connection. Astrid knows that throughout the village this morning, people are waking with the story fresh in their minds. Children are remembering the tale as they help with morning chores, finding new ways to apply its lessons to their daily activities. Adults are carrying its wisdom with them as they go about their work, using its insights to approach their tasks with greater patience and mindfulness. Is this how culture is transmitted? How wisdom is preserved and shared? Not through formal lectures or written texts, but through stories told around fires, through the intimate sharing of meaning that happens when people gather together in safety and love. Each telling plants seeds that grow in the fertile soil of imagination and memory, creating new understanding that will influence decisions and actions for years to come. After breakfast, Astrid steps outside to experience the transformed world that the night snowfall has. The air is crisp and clean, so cold that each breath forms a small cloud of vapor that disappears almost immediately. But the cold is not harsh or bitter. It is the clean, energizing cold of a perfect winter morning. The kind of cold that makes a person feel alive and alert. Astrid breathes deeply, filling her lungs with the pure air, feeling the way it awakens every cell in her body. As she stands in her doorway, she sees other villagers emerging from their houses, each person taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of the morning. There is something about fresh snow that calls forth this response. A pause, a moment of simple appreciation for the way the world has been transformed overnight. It is as if nature herself is telling a story, using snow and light and shadow to create a narrative of beauty and peace. Magnus appears at his own doorway, his white beard contrasting sharply with the dark wool of his winter cloak. He raises a hand in greeting, and Astrid waves back, both of them smiling at the simple pleasure of seeing a friend on a beautiful morning. No words are needed. The shared appreciation of the moment creates its own communication. Children begin to emerge from various houses, their excitement at the fresh snow evident in their quick movements and bright voices. Soon, they are building snow figures and engaging in gentle snowball fights, their laughter carrying clearly through the still air. Their parents watch with indulgent smiles, remembering their own childhood winters, their own joy in snow's endless possibilities for play and creativity. Astrid decides to visit her animals to make sure they're comfortable and well fed after the night of continued snowfall. She makes her way carefully along the path to the barn, her feet finding secure footing despite the new snow. The path has been used so many times over the years that her body knows every step by memory, can navigate it safely, even in darkness or challenging weather. The barn is warm and filled with the comfortable sounds and smells of healthy animals. Her cows stand placidly in their stalls, chewing methodically on the hay she provided yesterday evening. Their large, gentle eyes regard her with calm recognition, and she greets each animal by name, checking their water and adding fresh hay to their mangers. The rhythmic sound of their chewing is deeply soothing, a reminder of the simple contentment that comes from having basic needs met and being safe from the elements. Her sheep huddle together in their section of the barn, their wool thick and warm against the winter cold. They bleat softly as she approaches, recognizing the person who has cared for them through many seasons. Astrid runs her hands through their fleeces, checking for any problems, appreciating the softness and warmth that will eventually become clothing and blankets for her family and neighbors. The chickens in their protected coop are less impressed by the snow, but they seem content enough in their warm, dry environment, Several hens are sitting on nests, and Astrid collects the eggs they have laid, grateful for this source of fresh protein during the months when other foods are scarce. The eggs are warm in her hands, each one a perfect oval of potential nourishment. As she tends to her animals, Astrid finds herself thinking about the story she told last night, considering how its lessons apply to the simple tasks that fill her days. The villagers in the tale learn to find deep satisfaction in basic activities, caring for animals, preparing food, maintaining their homes. They discovered that when approached with the right attitude, even the most mundane tasks can become sources of peace and fulfillment. This is a lesson that Astrid has been learning throughout her life, but the story has helped her see it more clearly. There is something deeply satisfying about caring for animals, about ensuring that these creatures who depend on her are warm and fed and safe. The work requires attention and consistency, but it also provides a rhythm and purpose that connects her to the natural cycles of life. When she finishes with the animals, Astrid returns to her house to continue with the day's tasks. But she approaches these activities differently than she might have before last night's story. Instead of thinking about how quickly she can complete each job, she focuses on being fully present with what she is doing, on finding satisfaction in the process rather than just the outcome. She spends time spinning wool at her wheel, letting her hands find their rhythm while her mind relaxes into the meditative state that such work can induce. The wool transforms gradually from fluffy cloud into strong, smooth thread, and she watches the process with the kind of attention that the story encouraged. Each pull of the wheel, each twist of the fibre, becomes an opportunity for mindfulness and presence. As the morning progresses, neighbours begin to stop by, drawn perhaps by the memory of last night's gathering, or simply by the human need for connection on a beautiful winter day. Sigrid arrives first, carrying a small covered pot that steams gently in the cold air. "I brought some of the mead from last night," she says with a smile. "I heated it with spices, cinnamon and cloves, a little ginger for warmth. I thought we might share a cup while we talk about the story you told." The two women settle by Astrid's fire, cradling warm cups of spiced mead while they discuss the previous evening. But their conversation soon expands beyond the single tale to encompass the larger questions that stories raise. How wisdom is passed from generation to generation. What makes some stories memorable, while others are forgotten? How the act of telling and listening creates bonds between people that transcend individual differences. "I was thinking this morning," Sigrid says, taking a sip of her aromatic mead, "about how the story seemed to speak to each person differently. The children heard one message, the adults another, but everyone found something meaningful in the tale. That's the mark of a truly good story. It has layers of meaning that reveal themselves according to the listener's needs and understanding." Astrid nods thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to say, that stories are like seeds. The same story can grow into different plants in different soils, but each plant carries the essential nature of the original seed. The story of the winter of deep snow will mean one thing to Eric now, while he is still a child, and something different when he is a grown man with responsibilities of his own. Their conversation is interrupted by a gentle knock on the door, and Astrid opens it to find Freydis the wise woman standing on her threshold, her arms full of bundled herbs and her eyes bright with the particular energy that comes from spending time in the winter forest. "Good morning, friends," Freydis says as she enters, shaking the snow from her cloak. "I've been out gathering some of the winter herbs. Bark from the birch trees, needles from the pine, some of the mushrooms that grow on dead oak. The snow makes them easier to spot, and the cold preserves their potency." She unwraps her bundles on Astrid's table, revealing an assortment of plant materials that most people would overlook, but that Freydis knows contain powerful healing properties. Birch bark for pain and inflammation, pine needles rich in vitamins that prevent winter sickness, mushrooms that can boost the body's natural defenses against cold and darkness. "I was thinking about your story as I worked," Freydis continues, sorting her gathered materials, "about how the villagers in the tale learned to see winter not as an enemy, but as a teacher. That's something we herbalists know well. Winter plants often have the strongest medicine, as if the harshness of the season concentrates their healing power. This observation leads to a discussion about the different kinds of wisdom that each season offers. Spring teaches about renewal and new beginnings. Summer about abundance and growth. Autumn provides lessons about harvest and preparation, about letting go of what is no longer needed. But winter, they agree, offers perhaps the most important teaching of all: how to find peace and strength in stillness, how to discover the gifts that can only be received when the world grows quiet. As they talk, Astrid continues with her spinning, her hands working automatically while her mind engages with the conversation. The wheel turns steadily, producing thread that will eventually become cloth, cloth that will become garments, garments that will provide warmth and protection for years to come. The work is meditative and productive simultaneously, embodying the kind of integration between doing and being that the story encouraged. More neighbours arrive throughout the morning, drawn by some invisible signal that this is a day for gathering and sharing. Bjorn brings a small wooden box that he has been carving, its surface decorated with intricate patterns that tell their own wordless story. Ingrid carries a basket of wool that she has dyed a beautiful shade of blue, using berries and minerals she collected last autumn. Young Leaf, who spoke so thoughtfully the previous evening, arrives with a question that has been occupying his mind since he woke this morning. "I've been thinking about the villagers in the story," he says, settling cross-legged on a thick rug near the fire. "They learned to be content during that long winter. But what happened when spring came? Did they forget the lessons they had learned? Or did they manage to keep that sense of peace even when life became busy again?" This is exactly the kind of question that makes stories truly valuable. Not just the entertainment they provide in the moment, but the ongoing reflection and discussion they inspire. Astrid considers Leif's inquiry carefully, recognizing that it goes to the heart of one of life's most challenging problems: how to maintain inner peace and contentment in the midst of external demands and changes. That's a question each of us has to answer for ourselves, she says finally. The story tells us that the villagers learned something valuable during their winter of deep snow, but it doesn't tell us whether they were able to hold on to that learning. Perhaps that's because each person's ability to maintain peace depends on their own choices, their own commitment to remembering what matters most. Old Magnus, who has arrived while Astrid was speaking, nods approvingly at her response. That's the beauty of the old stories, he adds. They don't try to answer every question or solve every problem. Instead, they give us frameworks for thinking, ways of understanding our experiences that help us find our own answers. The conversation that follows explores this idea more deeply. The group discusses how stories serve not as rigid prescriptions for behavior, but as flexible tools for understanding. A single story can be interpreted in many different ways, can provide guidance for many different situations, can speak to many different kinds of people across many different circumstances. Think about the other stories we know, Magnus suggests. The tale of Thor's journey to the giants' realm can be understood as a story about courage, or about the importance of allies, or about the dangers of pride. Each reading is valid, and each offers different insights depending on what the listener needs to hear. As if summoned by this mention of other tales, more stories begin to emerge in the conversation. Someone mentions the story of the farmer who learned to speak with his animals, and suddenly everyone is remembering different versions of that tale, different details and interpretations that reveal how stories change and adapt as they pass from teller to teller. Freydis tells a brief version of the story about the healer who discovered that laughter was the most powerful medicine, and her telling sparks memories of similar tales about the healing power of joy and connection. Bjorn shares a story his grandfather told him about a woodcarver whose work became so beautiful that it seemed to have its own life. And this leads to a discussion about the relationship between craftsmanship and spirituality. Each story that is shared adds new layers to the morning's conversation, creating connections and parallels that illuminate not just individual tales, but the entire tradition of which they are part. The stories speak to each other across time and space, creating a web of meaning that encompasses the full range of human experience. As the morning progresses into afternoon, the gathering takes on the relaxed, unhurried quality that the previous night's story celebrated. No one feels pressure to leave or to accomplish other tasks. Instead, the group settles into the kind of timeless, communal experience that happens when people feel truly comfortable with each other and with the moment they are sharing. Food appears as if by magic. Bread and cheese, dried fruit and nuts, the warm spiced mead that Sigrid brought. People contribute whatever they have with them, and the simple meal becomes a feast of community and sharing. No one is in charge of the gathering, yet everyone contributes to its success, creating the kind of spontaneous cooperation that strong communities make possible. The children, who were playing in the snow earlier, begin to drift into the house. Drawn by the warmth and the sound of adult conversation, they settle quietly near the fire, listening to the stories with the particular attention that children bring to tales that are not specifically intended for them. Often, these overheard stories are the ones that have the most lasting impact, perhaps because they are received without the expectation that they should be educational or improving. As the afternoon light begins to fade, for even on the brightest winter days, darkness comes early in the north. The conversation gradually turns toward the evening ahead. Will there be another story night? Should they gather again? Or would it be better to let the previous evening's magic settle and mature before attempting to recreate it? I think, says Magnus thoughtfully, that story nights are like wildflowers. They cannot be forced to bloom, but when conditions are right, they appear naturally and beautifully. Last night was a gift that came to us without our planning. Tonight may bring its own gifts, but they may be different ones. This wisdom resonates with everyone present. The attempt to recreate magical experiences often results in disappointment, while openness to whatever wants to emerge can bring unexpected delights. The group decides to let the evening unfold naturally, without expectations or pressure, trusting that whatever happens will be exactly what is needed. As people begin to gather their things and prepare to return to their own homes, Astrid reflects on the day that is drawing to a close. The morning story continues to work its influence, but now it has been joined by many other tales, creating a rich tapestry of meaning and connection that will continue to influence the community's life in countless subtle ways. Thank you all, she says as her neighbours prepare to leave, for bringing your stories and your attention to this day. You have helped me understand that last night's tale was not just a single story, but part of a much larger story. The story of who we are as a people and how we choose to live together in this place we call home. The words feel inadequate to express what she really means, but everyone present understands. They have all felt the deeper currents that run beneath the surface of their gathering. The sense of participation as evening falls and the village once again settles into its winter quiet. Astrid tends to her fire and reflects on the gifts that the day has brought. The story told last night has generated ripples that will continue to spread, inspiring new conversations, new insights, new connections between past wisdom and present experience. Outside, the snow continues to fall gently, adding to the white blanket that covers the village and the surrounding countryside. Inside, the fire burns warm and bright, and the house holds the lingering warmth of the day's fellowship like a cherished memory. Tonight, Astrid knows, will bring its own gifts. Perhaps another gathering. Perhaps a quiet evening of solitary reflection. Perhaps something entirely unexpected. Whatever comes, she will meet it with the same openness and presence that the morning's discussions have reinforced, trusting in the wisdom of stories to guide her toward whatever understanding is needed. The story of the winter of deep snow has become part of her now, not just as a tale she knows how to tell, but as a lived understanding that influences how she approaches each moment of her life. And that, she realizes, is the true purpose of all stories, not just to entertain or even to teach, but to transform the people who receive them, to help them become more fully themselves, more deeply connected to the sources of meaning and wisdom that make life worth living. Chapter 4. The Dream of Tomorrow. As the second night settles over Bjornhaven, the village takes on an even deeper quality of peace than it held the evening before. The continued snowfall has muffled every sound except the most essential ones: the soft whisper of wind through pine branches, the distant call of a night owl, the gentle settling of houses as the cold deepens and the wood contracts slightly in its timeless response to winter's touch. Astrid sits by her fire, no longer spinning, but simply watching the flames dance among the logs, each flame telling its own story of transformation as solid wood becomes heat and light and finally ash. The day's gathering has left her with much to contemplate, and she finds herself drawn into the meditative state that often comes at the end of meaningful days, when the mind naturally seeks to integrate new understanding with existing wisdom. The stories that were shared today have created new connections in her mind, new ways of seeing the relationships between past and present, between individual experience and collective wisdom. She thinks about young Leaf's question about whether the villagers in the Winter of Deep Snow story managed to maintain their sense of peace when spring returned, and she realizes that this question touches on one of the deepest challenges of human existence: how to carry the insights gained in moments of clarity and peace into the more demanding times that inevitably follow. As she reflects, Astrid becomes aware of a gentle knocking at her door, not the confident rap of someone arriving for a planned meeting, but the hesitant tap of someone who hopes for welcome, but is prepared to be turned away if the timing is not right. She opens the door to find Eric standing on her threshold, the 10-year-old boy bundled in his warmest winter clothes, his cheeks red from the cold air. "Good evening, Astrid," he says politely, using the formal address that children are taught to employ with adults who are not family members. "My parents said I might ask if you would be willing to tell me another story tonight. I have been thinking all day about the story you told last night, and I was hoping—" His voice trails off, suddenly uncertain. Astrid's heart is touched by the boy's request and by the courage it took for him to walk through the snow to ask for what he wanted. She remembers being his age, remembers the intensity with which children can be affected by stories, the way a tale can capture a young imagination and refuse to let go until it has been fully explored and understood. "Of course, Eric," she says warmly, opening the door wider to welcome him in. "Come sit by the fire and warm yourself." "I would be honored," to share another story with you. As Eric sheds his outer garments and settled onto a cushion near the hearth, Astrid considers which tale might be most appropriate for a private telling. Which story might speak to whatever need has brought this young person to her door on this quiet evening. She returns to her chest of story tokens, letting her fingers move over the familiar shapes until they find the one that feels right for this moment. Her hand stops on a small, carved wooden acorn, its surface polished smooth by countless handlings. This evening's story, Astrid says, settling into her storytelling voice, is about a tree. But not just any tree, a very special oak that grew in the forest near a village much like our own, in the days when the world was younger and the connections between all living things were easier to see and understand. As she begins to speak, Eric settles more deeply into his listening position, his young face serious with concentration. The fire provides the perfect backdrop for the tale, its dancing flames creating shadows that seem to move with the rhythm of Astrid's words, adding visual magic to the auditory spell she is weaving. Long ago, she continues, when the first settlers came to this northern land, they cleared spaces in the great forest to build their homes and plant their crops. They chose their locations carefully, looking for places with good soil and fresh water, areas that would be sheltered from the worst winter winds, but open enough to receive the precious sunlight of the short northern summers. Eric nods as he listens, having heard many times about the challenges that the early settlers faced. He knows that life in the north requires careful planning and constant attention to the rhythms of the seasons, that survival depends on understanding the land and working with its natural patterns rather than against them. In one such clearing, Astrid continues, the settlers left standing a single magnificent oak tree. It was ancient even then, with a trunk so wide that 6 grown men holding hands could barely encircle it, and branches that spread out like great arms to shelter half the village square. The tree was so beautiful, so obviously alive and aware, that no one could bring themselves to cut it down. As she speaks, Astrid's voice takes on the dreamy quality that signals a particularly magical story, a tale that operates on multiple levels of meaning. Eric can visualize the great oak clearly, can imagine its massive presence dominating the village square, its branches providing shade in summer and a kind of protection in winter. The children of the village loved that oak tree, Astrid says, glancing at Eric with a small smile. They played in its shade during the summer months, climbed its lower branches, collected its acorns to eat and to plant in other places. The tree seemed to welcome their attention, seemed to enjoy their laughter and games. This detail makes Eric smile in return. He thinks of the trees he loves to climb during the warmer months, the secret places he has. The story takes on a subtle tension now, the kind of conflict that makes listeners lean forward slightly, wondering how the situation will be resolved. Eric can sense the approaching crisis, can feel the weight of the decision that the villagers will have to make. A few of the more practical-minded villagers began to argue that the tree should be cut down, Astrid says, her voice carrying a note of sadness at the thought. They pointed out that the oak, magnificent as it was, served no obvious function. It produced no food that the villagers could not gather elsewhere. It provided no materials that could not be obtained from other sources. It simply stood there, taking up valuable space, contributing nothing concrete to the community's welfare. Eric frowns at this, instinctively understanding that the practical villagers are missing something important, even though he cannot yet articulate what it might be. He has felt the presence of old trees, has sensed the way they seem to watch and listen, has experienced the comfort that comes from sitting in their shade or shelter. The debate over the tree's fate continued for many months, Astrid continues. Neighbours who had been friends for years found themselves on opposite sides of the question. Those who wanted to preserve the oak spoke of its beauty, its history, the way it had become a symbol of the village itself. Those who wanted it removed spoke of progress, efficiency, the practical needs of a growing community. The fire crackles softly as Astrid pauses in her telling, giving Eric time to absorb the complexity of the situation. Stories like this one are valuable precisely because they don't offer simple answers to difficult questions, but instead help listeners develop the kind of thinking that can navigate real-world complexity with wisdom and compassion. Finally, Astrid says, the villagers decided to consult the oldest member of their community, a woman so ancient that no one could remember a time when she had not been old. She had lived through more seasons than anyone could count, had seen the village grow from a few rough shelters to the prosperous settlement it had become. Eric settles more deeply into his listening position, recognizing that the story is approaching its moment of revelation, the point where the central wisdom will be revealed. He can feel the anticipation building, not just in himself, but in the very air of the room, as if the story itself knows that it is approaching its most important moment. The old woman listened carefully to both sides of the argument. Astrid continues. She heard the practical concerns about space and efficiency, and she acknowledged their validity. She also heard the emotional arguments about beauty and tradition, and she recognized the truth in those as well. But then she asked a question that surprised everyone. Astrid pauses here, letting the moment stretch out, building the suspense that makes this part of the story so effective. Eric waits breathlessly, his attention completely focused on the storyteller's next words. The old woman asked, "How deep do you think this oak tree's roots go?" Astrid says, and something in her voice suggests that this question contains more significance than it might initially appear to hold. Eric considers the question seriously, trying to imagine the vast network of roots that must extend beneath such a massive tree. He has seen the roots of smaller trees when they have been uprooted by storms, has marveled at how extensive the underground portion can be compared to the visible parts above ground. No one in the village knew the answer, Astrid continues. They had never thought to wonder about the tree's roots, had never considered what lay beneath the surface of the ground. So the old woman suggested that they find out. She proposed that they carefully excavate around the base of the tree, not to harm it, but to discover the full extent of its underground network. The story takes an unexpected turn here, becoming less about the decision of whether to cut down the tree and more about the process of discovery, about learning to see the hidden dimensions of familiar things. Eric finds himself completely absorbed in this new direction, wondering what the villagers will find when they begin their excavation. The work of uncovering the roots was slow and careful, Astrid says, her voice reflecting the painstaking nature of the task. The villagers used small tools, working by hand to avoid damaging the delicate root fibers. They dug in shifts, with some people working while others rested, so that the excavation could continue steadily without anyone becoming exhausted. As she describes this work, Astrid's voice takes on the rhythm of labor itself, steady and persistent. Hypnotic in its regularity, Eric can almost feel himself participating in the dig, can imagine the satisfaction of careful, purposeful work undertaken in cooperation with others. What they discovered amazed everyone, Astrid continues, and her voice fills with wonder as she describes the revelation. The oak tree's roots extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. They spread out under the entire village, creating a vast underground network that connected every house, every building, every garden plot. The roots had been there so long that they had become part of the very foundation of the settlement. This image captures Eric's imagination completely. He pictures the hidden root system like an underground map of the village, connecting everything and everyone in ways that are invisible from the surface, but fundamental to the community's existence. That was not the most remarkable discovery, Astrid says, building toward the story's climax. As they followed the roots farther and deeper, the villagers realized that the oak tree was not just connected to their settlement, but to the entire forest around it. Its roots intertwined with the roots of every other tree for miles in every direction, creating a network so vast and complex that it was impossible to see where one tree ended and another began. The implications of this discovery begin to dawn on Eric as he listens. The story is no longer just about a single tree or even a single village, but about the interconnectedness of all life, about the hidden relationships that bind everything together in ways that are not immediately obvious, but are absolutely essential. The old woman smiled when she saw the villagers' amazement, Astrid continues. She had known what they would find, had understood that some things cannot be judged by their visible parts alone. You see, she told them, this tree that you thought was taking up space in your village is actually holding your village together. Its roots prevent erosion during heavy rains, filter and purify the water that feeds your wells. Create the soil conditions that allow your gardens to flourish, Eric's eyes widen as he grasps the full meaning of the old woman's words. The tree that seemed to serve no practical purpose was actually performing functions that were invisible but vital, supporting the entire community in ways that no one had recognized or appreciated. Moreover, the old woman continued, Astrid says, this tree serves as a connection point in the great network that links all living things in the forest. Remove it, and you do not just lose one tree. You break connections that have taken hundreds of years to develop, relationships that support the health and balance of the entire ecosystem. The story has reached its moment of deepest teaching, and Eric can feel the weight of the wisdom it contains. He understands now that the tale is not really about a tree at all, but about the importance of recognizing and honoring the hidden connections that hold communities together, the invisible relationships that make life possible. The villagers, once they understood what the old woman was teaching them, made their decision quickly and unanimously, Astrid says, bringing the story toward its resolution. Not only would they preserve the oak tree, but they would honor it as the heart of their community, the living symbol of all the connections that bound them together in mutual support and care. As the story concludes, Eric feels a deep satisfaction, the sense of completion that comes when a tale has delivered exactly the wisdom that was needed. The story of the patient oak will stay with him, he knows, will influence how he thinks about community and connection, about the importance of looking beneath the surface to understand the true nature of things. Thank you, he says quietly, his young voice carrying a seriousness that shows how deeply the story has affected him. I think I understand now why some things that seem unimportant are actually the most important things of all. Astrid nods approvingly, recognizing that Eric has grasped not just the surface meaning of the tale, but its deeper implications. That's exactly right, she says, and now you carry that understanding with you. Just as the villagers in the story carried their new appreciation for the oak tree, the wisdom belongs to you now, to use however you think best. As Eric prepares to return home through the snow, bundling himself once again in his warm winter clothes, Astrid reflects on the gift that this private storytelling has provided. Sometimes the most powerful sharing happens not in large gatherings, but in intimate moments like this, when a story can be tailored precisely to the needs and understanding of a single listener. After Eric leaves, waving goodbye from her doorway before disappearing into the gentle snowfall, Astrid continues her evening routine. She banks the fire carefully, ensuring that it will provide warmth through the night while conserving fuel for the days ahead. She tidies the room, putting away the remnants of the day's informal feast, preparing her space for the night's rest. But before she settles into sleep, Astrid takes a few moments to stand at her window and look out over the village. Each house glows softly with its own firelight, and she can imagine the families within settling into their own evening routines. Children are being tucked into bed with gentle words and soft songs. Adults are completing their final tasks of the day, preparing for the rest that will restore their energy for tomorrow's activities. The scene fills her with a deep contentment, a sense of being part of something larger and more meaningful than her individual life. This feeling, she realizes, is exactly what the Winter of Deep Snow story was describing. The peace that comes from recognizing one's place in the larger pattern, from understanding that individual contentment and community well-being are not separate goals, but different aspects of the same fundamental harmony. As she prepares for sleep, Astrid finds herself thinking about the dreams that might come to her tonight, shaped as they will be by the stories that have filled the past 2 days. She has noticed that after story nights, her dreams often take on a particular quality. Not the random, chaotic imagery that sometimes accompanies sleep, but coherent narratives that seem to continue the work of understanding that the conscious stories began. Tonight, she suspects her dreams will be filled with images of snow and trees, of villages wrapped in winter quiet, of communities learning to find peace and strength in stillness and connection. These dream stories will process and integrate the wisdom that has been shared, will help her understand at an even deeper level what it means to live with contentment and presence. The bed welcomes her with its familiar comfort, thick furs and woolen blankets. A mattress stuffed with the down of geese that she raised herself, pillows filled with dried herbs that promote restful sleep. As she settles into the bed's embrace, Astrid can feel the day's tensions dissolving, replaced by the kind of deep relaxation that comes from a day well lived, from meaningful work accomplished and meaningful connections made. Outside, the snow continues its patient work, adding to the blanket that covers the village and the surrounding countryside. Each flake falls in perfect silence, contributing to the great quiet that enables rest and dream and the mysterious work of renewal that happens when consciousness steps aside and allows deeper processes to take over. The village of Bjornhaven sleeps peacefully under its white covering, each house holding its own small portion of warmth and light and human presence. The people within those houses carry with them the gifts that the past 2 days have provided. Stories that teach about patience and presence, conversations that deepen understanding, moments of connection that remind them of what makes life meaningful. And in her comfortable bed, surrounded by the familiar scents and sounds of home, Astrid drifts towards sleep with a heart full of gratitude. Gratitude for the stories that have been passed down to her, for the community that shares in their telling, for the simple miracle of finding oneself safe and warm on a cold winter night, connected to others by bonds of affection and shared wisdom. As consciousness fades and dream begins to take its place, Astrid's last thought is about the continuity that stories provide, the way they link past to present to future, the way they ensure that wisdom discovered by one generation can benefit all the generations that follow. The story of the Winter of Deep Snow will be told again, she knows, perhaps tomorrow night, or next week, or next year, whenever conditions are right and listeners are ready to receive its gifts. And the story of the patient oak will find its way to other young ears, will help other children understand the importance of seeing beneath the surface, of recognizing the hidden connections that make life possible. These stories, and countless others, will continue their work of teaching and healing and connecting, generation after generation, as long as there are people willing to gather around fires and share the wisdom of those who came before. The snow falls gently on the village of Bjornhaven, each flake a blessing, each moment a gift. Inside warm houses, people sleep deeply and dream peacefully, their rest made sweeter by the knowledge that they are part of something larger than themselves, something that honors both individual peace and collective wisdom, something that promises that spring will come again and bring with it new opportunities for growth and connection and understanding. In the morning, when the sun rises over the snow-covered landscape, the village will wake to another day of quiet beauty, another opportunity to practice the lessons that the stories have taught. Children will help with morning chores while remembering tales of patience and presence. Adults will approach their work with the mindfulness that comes from understanding how each task connects to the larger web of community life. And somewhere, in the peaceful space between waking and sleeping, new stories will begin to form, stories based on the lived experiences of these people, in this place, at this time. These new stories will eventually join the ancient ones, will be told around future fires to future generations, will carry forward the ever-evolving wisdom that helps human beings learn how to live well together on this beautiful and challenging earth. The fire in Astrid's hearth settles into its overnight rhythm, glowing coals that will maintain their warmth until morning without consuming too much fuel. The house holds this warmth like a gentle embrace, protecting its sleeping occupant from the cold outside, while providing the perfect environment for the deep rest that restores both body and spirit. And in the larger embrace of the winter night, the village of Bjornhaven rests peacefully under its blanket of snow, a small jewel of human warmth and wisdom in the vast northern landscape, a place where stories live and grow and work their quiet magic of connection and understanding, generation after generation, as constant and reliable as the turning of the seasons themselves. The snow continues to fall, gentle and persistent, adding its own wordless story to the collection of tales that will be remembered and retold for years to come. It is a story written in white silence, in the language of peace and rest and renewal, in the ancient alphabet of earth and sky, and the quiet spaces where human hearts learn to find their truest home. The end. This tale of winter peace and community wisdom has been told. May it bring rest to weary minds, comfort to anxious hearts, and gentle dreams filled with the deep contentment that comes from knowing oneself to be part of the great story that connects all things in bonds of love and understanding.